Hey guys, today we're going to go over how to install the framing for a full height sliding door in our Flex series. Before getting started, I wanted to go over one important framing detail when framing for a full height sliding door in our Flex series. Instead of using a Flex track as your top track, we actually use our Genesis stud. The Genesis stud is a thicker profile stud, and the reason we use this is because it gives a solid attaching point for the C-rail for the sliding door. Now with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and measure for our Genesis stud and we'll get it cut. When measuring for your Genesis stud, it's going to measure for the full length of that wall. Now this could be from wall to wall, wall to post, post to post. It's going to be situation dependent. So we'll go ahead, we'll take that measurement nice and tight, and we'll get our Genesis stud cut. Before attaching the Genesis stud to the ceiling, slide in your Flex L brackets into the center groove of the Genesis stud. To determine how many Flex L brackets you need, take a look at your drawing. You'll need one Flex L bracket per vertical stud. When sliding in your Flex L brackets, make sure this leg of the Flex L brackets are facing the same direction. Now, when you have one against the wall, you're going to want that facing in towards the center of the Genesis stud so it's not contacting the wall. I'll go ahead, I'll slide in my Flex L brackets. When sliding in the Flex L brackets into the Genesis stud, go ahead and roughly space them. You can actually look at your drawing, that'll give you a rough idea of where they need to be. We like to go ahead and set them in that approximate position because when we go to attach it to the ceiling, we want to make sure that attaching screw is not going to interfere with the location of those Flex L brackets. Now, if they do interfere, not a big issue. All you need to do is back out your attaching screws. So I'm going to go ahead, get these roughly spaced out, and we'll get it attached to the ceiling. When preparing to attach the Genesis stud to the ceiling, you'll need to use a screw that is long enough to go through the center of the Genesis stud and into the ceiling. In this case, I'm going to be using a 2.5-inch self-tapping screw. Now, it's going to be up to you what type of screws you want to use. We do not supply the external attaching hardware for our wall system. Before attaching the Genesis stud to the ceiling, make sure you're on your predetermined layout lines. From there, run your attaching screw through the center groove of the Genesis stud. Now we'll run attaching screws every 4 to 6 feet. Keep in mind, you're going to have a sliding door hanging off of this Genesis stud, so we want to make sure that the Genesis stud is solidly attached to the ceiling. Before moving on, I wanted to go over one major detail when attaching the Genesis stud to the ceiling. Since we have a sliding door coming off the Genesis stud, it is extremely important that Genesis stud is perfectly level. If for whatever reason your ceiling is not level, make sure you put shims between the Genesis stud and the ceiling. If this creates a large enough gap where there's light coming through, you'll need to come up with some type of filler. This is not something we're going to provide. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and move on to framing our door opening. With the Genesis stud attached to the ceiling, we can now measure for our vertical flex studs within the door opening. To measure for the vertical flex studs, measure from the floor to the bottom edge of the Genesis stud and subtract 1/8 of an inch. We'll take a measurement on this side of the opening, come over approximately 38 inches, and take a measurement on this side of the opening. To install your vertical flex studs within the door opening, take your flex stud and place it under the Genesis stud and run it straight to the floor. Then slide in your Flex L bracket into the center of the flex stud. Attach the L bracket to the flex stud using a 3/4 inch framing screw. With the Flex L bracket installed into the vertical flex stud on this side of the opening, We'll now install the flex stud on this side of the door opening. This is going to be the same process. The stud's going to run under the Genesis stud and run directly to the floor. We'll slide our flex L bracket in and get it attached. With the door opening studs installed, I can now set the spacing for the door opening. Before setting the spacing for the door opening, you need to establish one of the flex studs within the opening. What this means is you've plumbed up and anchored one of your flex studs in place. Now, in this case, I'm coming off an existing wall. I've already went ahead and plumbed up and attached this flex stud to the wall. At the top of the opening, where the flex stud and the Genesis stud come together, all you'll need to do is tighten the set screw on the flex L bracket to anchor the top in place. I did a quick video on how to properly install studs coming off existing walls for door openings, so go ahead and check that out. Now, if you have a door opening in the center of a run, what you'll need to do is plumb up one of your flex studs within the door opening. Then tighten your set screws at the top to anchor the top in place, and then install your flex track at the floor to anchor the bottom of the stud in place. Now, with that in mind, we'll go ahead and set our door spacing. When determining the width of your door opening, take a look at your drawing. The dimension on the drawing is going to be from the most inside point of the flex stud to the same point on the opposite stud. Majority of the time, this dimension is going to be 3'2" or 38 inches. Now, with that in mind, we'll go ahead and set our door spacing. To set your door opening, measure from the most inside point of the flex stud on the established side of the opening over to the same point on the stud on the opposite side of the opening. With this flex stud in place, go ahead and tighten the set screw on the flex L bracket to anchor the top of the door opening. With the top anchored, we'll go ahead and move to the floor. At the floor, use the same measuring points as the ceiling. Measure from the most inside point of the established flex stud over to this flex stud. With this door opening stud established, we can now measure for our floor track. To measure for the flex track attaching to the floor, measure from the opposite side wall or flex post to the most inside point of the flex stud and the door opening. This flex track is going to butt directly into this flex stud. Take my measurement and we'll get our flex track cut. Before attaching the flex track to the floor, slide in your flex L brackets. Make sure this leg of the flex L bracket is in the same direction as the flex L brackets in the Genesis stud. This will help when you need to move your vertical studs for spacing purposes. You'll need one flex L bracket per vertical stud. I'll go ahead and I'll slide in my flex L brackets. When sliding in your L brackets, place them in the approximate location of where they're going to be set. The reason we do this is because when you run your anchoring screws, we want to avoid interference of the L bracket. Now, if it does interfere with your L bracket, not a big deal. All we need to do is move the attaching screw. So we'll go ahead and attach our flex track to the floor. Set the floor track in place. Slide in the flex L bracket into the center of the flex stud. Attach the flex L bracket to the flex stud using a 3/4 inch framing screw. Before attaching the flex track to the floor, it is extremely important that you maintain your door opening spacing. Once you have double checked your door opening spacing, you can attach the flex track to the floor. Run your first attaching screw through the open hole on the flex L bracket. What this will do is it'll anchor the door opening. With my door opening anchored, I can go ahead and anchor the rest of the floor track. Now you only need to run screws every 4 to 6 feet, and you'll want to use a screw that's appropriate for the floor you're working with. With the door opening frame and our floor track installed, we can now measure for our vertical flex studs running from floor track to Genesis stud. To measure for the vertical flex studs, measure from floor to ceiling and subtract 2.5 inches. This measurement allows the flex stud to go into the floor track and up to the Genesis stud. It also allows a slight air gap between the top and the bottom of the flex stud to allow you to move that flex stud when it comes time to space the studs properly. So I'll go ahead and I'll take my measurements for the flex studs. To install your vertical flex studs, place the bottom of the flex stud into the floor track. Stand the flex stud up so it is near the flex L bracket in the Genesis stud. Slide the flex L bracket into the center of the flex stud. Slightly pick up on the flex stud so it creates an air gap at the bottom of the stud as well as maintains an air gap at the top. Attach the L bracket to the flex stud using a 3/4 inch framing screw. Move to the floor and attach the L bracket to the flex stud. Repeat this process for all of your vertical studs on the wall. To determine the location of the vertical studs, take a look at the drawing. The drawing is going to give you an approximate locations of where those studs need to be. Ultimately, the installers on site are going to decide where those vertical studs end up. With the vertical flex studs installed, the framing for a full height sliding door is complete. Before ending the video, I wanted to do an overview on how this door is going to mount to the wall system. We're going to have a C-rail that is attached to the Genesis stud attached to the ceiling. This is why we wanted that Genesis stud to be perfectly level. If it's out of level, the door is not going to operate properly. This door is going to slide over these fixed panels, whether it be a glass panel or solid panel, it's going to be depending on your design. So with that said, that's going to complete the video. And if you have any questions, please contact our office.